Share my screen. All right. So this is let's see. Able to. Okay, you should be able to see my screen. All right. So the principles of concise writing. This is like one of straight up probably, in my opinion, the hardest things to get down as a writer, because as a writer you always want to write, and it's hard to know what to omit and know what to leave in. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a better understanding of it. Let's get into it. Okay. All right. So let it rip before the reader dips. It's kind of pleased with that title, to be honest. So as you can see here, I went through this and actually, crossed out stuff that was technically not necessary, even though I wrote it. And then I got a little cheeky down here with the Orwell quote. I don't think it would be grammatically correct to make these cuts, but I think you still get the meaning of the sentence without the words. So kind of ironic, but just something to think about when it comes to concise writing is that like it's if you read old newspapers and shit, dude, people are like out there just rambling on about their thoughts about stuff, and it's interesting to see a different time. But today we are competing with stuff like television, social media, and radio, and so these are mediums that people have to engage a lot less with in order to get the same amount of information. And so, we really are kind of our use case here, or the reason that somebody would go to us, is it's looking a little rough, generally speaking. But there are a lot of people out there who still enjoy reading, and it is generally like a better medium for actually becoming informed, because in order to consume it, you have to engage with it. Um, but it's something to really think about is like there's absolutely no room to be a writer when it comes to journalism, and what I mean by that is like there is no room really for you to waste time trying to like be a good writer. Your role and your job as a journalist is just purely to convey the information, of what's happening. And that doesn't mean like that every article specifically has to be like a really dry, just kind of bullet point thing about something that happened. No, it just means that each word and every graph needs to convey some form of information about the topic at hand, right? We'll get into that in a second, though. And so ultimately, really what you want to think about is you really, really want to respect their time, because by virtue of them reading your article, they're already kind of doing you a service and putting a little bit of faith or trust in you. So don't waste their time with stupid bullshit. Don't waste their time with like, fancy words or anything like that. You're not going to like the way you impress somebody with journalistic writing is by being concise, by telling a story. Our job is to take complicated stuff, complicated let's say for example like local legislation, right, and to translate it in a way that people can understand it and why it's important. And you're interfering with that translation if you start to like write. But we'll move on a little bit. And so this is a big thing of mine. Do not write to fill the page. You shouldn't, like, every single word should be operating in the service of like conveying an idea, right? Or a bit of information of something that happened or something that's happening, stuff like that. And so, if you're looking at a sentence and you want to ask yourself, like, what am I bringing to the table here? Like, what am I telling people? What information am I giving them? And if the answer is like nothing, or it's like just a transitionary sentence or something like that, get rid of it. It has no place there. Every word, every graph, every sentence should convey an idea or something like that. And so here's a couple types of examples of stuff along those lines, like bad examples of things that don't convey information at all. Right. First of all, we've got the obvious. Don't waste my time with the obvious. Don't waste the reader's time with the obvious. Something like, okay, example, academic stress can compound stress outside of school. Most people can assume that. Most people know that, right? This isn't like the most egregious example because you are kind of saying something, but I think it's obvious, right? And so, think to yourself, do I really need to say this? Or is it something that we can trust the reader to understand. And that's a big thing that, it's trust on the reader's side by, engaging with your article, and then it's trust on your side by, being willing to or understanding that most readers aren't stupid. They know, they know basic things, and a print audience is generally going to be more informed than like a television audience, and they're going to be more engaged. So do them the favor of respecting their intelligence, and don't say stuff that's obvious. There's another one. Commuters experience a different college experience than those who live on campus. Obviously, what is it? Explain why. That would be like the information that you'd be conveying there. Really, like the way you want to think about writing for journalism is more of like building a case, like a legal case, than like writing a book, because everything you're dealing with is nonfiction, right? And so like, you're just trying to lay out what happened and why it's important. And then the writing exists to tie all that together. And then we have the needlessly verbose, which is just, when you're saying something with a lot of words that could be said with one, and this is literally kind of why some words exist, is to take ideas or take long sentences and just so you can say it quickly, right? So this is an example that I ran into, which was the letter, which was not signed by anyone, featured a scathing indictment of the university, right? We have a word for that, anonymous. Okay, so the anonymous, as I should say, the anonymous letter was a scathing indictment of the university. Is how you can just say that quickly and get to the point, and I think a lot of people look at that, especially when you're editing your own work, and you're like, whoa, I need something to tie this together, or it's not wordy enough. 9 times out of 10, when you're thinking that, you're wrong. You want to be going the opposite way, cutting more stuff out, and if you read it sentence to sentence, it does kind of like, I run into this in my own writing a lot, where it looks disjointed and kind of janky, but really what like impression that sort of writing is giving is like straight to the point. Here are the facts. I know the facts, and I'm giving them to you, so really try to write like that. Let's see. Yeah, here's another example of the needlessly verbose. The criminal is said to be tried by a jury of his peers on this Monday. You can just say the criminal will face a jury on Monday. This isn't like the formulation of America. We know that somebody's going to face a jury of their peers, but all right, move on to the next slide. And also, if you have any questions or anything, feel free to stop me. But if not, we'll just keep going. Let's see. So yeah, that's how you avoid filler and how you kind of identify what filler is. So, I already mentioned this, but go back, look at your article, check the graphs, check the sentences, check the words. By graphs, I mean paragraphs, and see like, okay, what information am I giving the reader here? If it's not very much, then maybe you could cut it down to a sentence and then attach it onto another graph. If it's nothing, you can get rid of it, okay, yeah, so check your graphs. This is the big one. I mentioned this already, but information is what our job deals with, not writing. So put in, like, sit down and think about what information you're going to be conveying in your stories, what the most important information is, because that's what's going to be at the top. And then you can start thinking about writing. What helps me is like, get like 4 or 5 bullet points, which is just like, here's the core of the story, right? And then build it off that. That's like the skeleton, and then you can build the story. Let's see. So yeah, remember inverted pyramid. Yeah, the core graphs will be what make up the top half of your story. And then after that is when you can start, because, what I don't want to impart is like, what some people do is they'll be like, okay, well, if I cut my story down, now it's like 300 words. Okay, well, what you can do then is, because, no one really wants to click on a whole article to read a 300-word story, is just think about, like, this is the core of the job of the journalist, is think about like other external sources of information that might be relevant, and then try to incorporate them into the story, right? And that's when you start. So like, like, let's say there's an earthquake. The core of your story is going to be the earthquake and like, people's reaction to it, the devastation, whatever, but once you get down to the lower parts of the article, that's when you can start being like, here's the last time an earthquake happened, here's what the response looked like, that type of stuff, how much money it's going to cost. Um, but yeah, think in terms of information, not in terms of writing, and then remember inverted pyramid. But we'll get a little bit more into that in a second. Um, Active voice is huge. If you're not like super familiar with active voice or like know it for sure when you see it, I would recommend checking out at the end of the slides. We have a few links that you can go to sort of quiz yourself and stuff like that. Once you get it down, it's pretty easy. But others courts, he did the thing, not the thing was done by him, right? So it's the subject is doing something, right? Instead of like making, I think that would be you're taking like the indirect object and making it the subject. You just want to have the subject say something, right? So the Senate passed the bill, not the bill was passed by the Senate. And it doesn't seem like you're like saving a ton there, but that's like 2 words out of, I think, so that's 5. The Senate passed the bill, and then that's 7. So yeah, you're saving 2 words, and that's like the bit 25-30% of your article you could cut down on if you stick to active voice. Another example: Timothy founded the org during his freshman year. Not the org was founded by Timothy during his freshman year. And again, it does seem kind of minor, but this is going to be the type of stuff that helps you like submit like a clean, concise copy. Because once you get into like the weirder, if you're like really stuck on doing passive voice, you'll get into like these really weird like subordinate clauses and stuff, and it just messes with the structure. So just as much as you can stick to active. There will be times when passive is better. I think when I turn an article, usually like the little proofreader that we use will say it's like 20% passive, but sometimes you just can't avoid it. But generally speaking, look at a sentence, say, can I make this active without it sounding weird? And if so, go ahead and do it. Because it's just going to make you sound more informed, more to the point, and it's going to give more of a professional vibe. Next. Okay, this is a little exercise. I was expecting more people, so we don't have to like do it, but we can run through it a little bit. So yeah, you're covering an SGA meeting. The only 2 notable things to happen in the first hour are a couple of appointments of students to various SFAC positions and a faculty architect addressing the Senate in regards to planned campus improvements. Then an argument breaks out over a resolution in support of Palestine. 3 distinct groups emerge, one in support of the resolution, one against, and a sizable minority that believes the resolution is outside the scope of SGA. The meeting ends after a senator who is affiliated with a Palestinian student group storms out. You recorded the meeting and have good quotes that represent each side's view. How would you order this information, and what external information could you add to the story that would provide meaningful context? Now, if you want to, you can go ahead and try that out. But if not, we can just get into kind of my take on it. I'm gonna give you like 15 seconds, and I'm gonna assume you're good. All right, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm assuming you're good. Okay, so this is how I would do it, right? So always, 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 when it comes to SGA, what you want at the top is the drama. Okay, that's what our readers care about. Okay, like arguments and stuff like that. That's what you lead in with, and I think some people might see that as tacky or whatever, but no, it's like you're not just focusing on like the surface level drama. It's like the dramas you're in. That's the big kind of newsworthy thing that happened. People are fighting. People are getting passionate, and then it's like, okay, about what, and it's like, okay, there's this divisive bill that's relating to Palestine. And that's when you start getting into like quotes from the people in the actual, who are in the discussion, who are in the argument, right? So yeah, you start with the division and the resolution, right? Because that's the big thing that happened, is that this resolution caused an argument. And then you get into the quotes from all the 3 sides there, so you've got the people in support of it, the people against it, and the people who think it's not their job to deal with. And this is like usually how like controversial things in SGA go. And then so once you've got that, like, you'll probably get a lot of quotes there, and so that would be probably a big article. And for something like just an event recap, like an SGA meeting, it's not always, you don't always have time to like build additional info at the bottom. But if you do, I think it's a great idea too. And so if we were just doing event coverage, it would probably end at quotes from all sides, and then maybe you just skipped the least important info. But I think, it's always good to think in terms of what additional information you can add to make the reader more knowledgeable, right? So we start with the divisive resolution. We go to the quotes from all the sides to kind of paint the picture of this being like a three-way kind of argument. And then we can start getting into the external info. And we'll start with history. That's just where I normally go, right? So you look in the you look in the past, you look at previous articles that have been written, and you say like, okay, well, these people are saying this is outside the scope of SGA. Has SGA done anything like this in the past? And then if so, that's something that you can include in the article. And then outside opinions, right? So if you have time, what you could do is go to places like in the context of this article, UHLL or Students for Justice in Palestine, and kind of get like their organizational quotes on like a statement from each of them in what they think of the resolution and stuff like that. And then finally, you cap it off with the least important info, which in this case was. So we're thinking about this as a meeting recap, right? The least important info here was the appointment of the students and the architect addressing the school. Like a lot of people might look at that and be like, that's the most important thing because it's, like they think drama is childish, but that's not what people really care about when it comes, like no one really gives a shit about like some random kid got, you know, on the SFAC committee. No one really cares. It's important, like that information needs to be in the article, but nowhere near the top because no one cares. That's the type of stuff that you just want to make a record of so that in the future, like let's say somebody who got on the SFAC committee does something bad, or fumbles the bag somehow, then you can kind of be like, okay, well, we reported that this person was getting appointed, oh, the Senate voted them in unanimously, so the stuff at the bottom is really just for posterity's sake a lot of times, and to make a record of it. But it's very important still to include that. But what you're really looking at here in the picture I'm trying to paint is that like each of these aspects isn't really about writing at all. It's all about the information that we're trying to get to people. And writing is like how you're going to bundle all that together. You're going to take this graph, this design, and you're going to bundle it in writing into an article. And that is like how you should think about the skill of writing when it comes to this stuff. And as long as you stick to purely just trying to get the information across as concisely and as clearly as you can, then you'll avoid filler just naturally. And that doesn't mean, like I said, that everything's got to be strict reporting. It just has to be like tied to information. So like, let's think of would be a good example of this, right? Like let's say like a bill in, I keep going to student government because that's where I kind of got my start. But like let's say there's a bill that passed, and it's like kind of corrupt, kind of questionable, right? You can still include that info. You don't just have to say a bill was passed, like no judgment call on it. You can include the info, but you just have to do it in the form of like quotes from people who, other senators who are like, yeah, this is bullshit, or get like previous administrations, and stuff like that. So it, in a sense, like this shouldn't limit you, right? Like being concise shouldn't be a limiting factor, right? It's more just trimming the fat, and if when you're trimming the fat, you're finding yourself losing like a large portion of the mass or like the meat of your article, then it's like, okay, that was never meat. That was just gristle. Find some other meat, I'm gonna get away from meat metaphors because it's kind of weird. But anyway, let's see what we have next. Yeah, so basically, that's most of it. I have one more thing after this really quickly I want to run through, but if you have any questions, now's the time. Just jump in. I think that is a no. But there's some good links here. The active versus passive voice practice that I mentioned earlier, the Hemingway editor, really important to use that purely just as a guide, because if you take it's bad. Like it's not great, but like it'll help you, find like at least highlight areas where there might be unnecessary words. And then you look at that, you make a judgment call on whether or not it's right. And then this is just kind of a a guide I thought was helpful for writing it. But here, there's one other thing I wanted to run through, and this is an article I found just in our drive. I don't know who wrote it or anything like that. I think it's pretty old. Honestly, I think it might have been written as like an example of a bad story. But I figured we could take a look at it and just sort of see what we can cut. I think there's going to be a lot wrong with this story, assuming it was written to be intentionally bad. But let's just kind of take a look here. So, student government passed the proposal February 15th for having a break for UH students in the fall semester. There's a lot wrong with that. We'll not even get into that. The 2 days off will be implemented in the academic calendar if university academic committee fully. If so, you could just probably get rid of that right off the bat. Because it's lowercase, we're talking about just some general academic committee. We can just say the university fully approves it. And this is all fucked up, but we won't worry about it. 1% of the committee within the next few weeks, and the SGA are quite optimistic about its results. Unnecessary because we say that in the next quote instantly, right? We're optimistic that that's the SGA president, so you don't need to say that. Everything that's outside quotes really should just be stuff that's not in the quote. It's okay to kind of tease it a little bit and like repeat stuff because it can help make your writing flow a little bit. But generally speaking, try to find a way to like introduce a speaker with a paraphrase of something that they said that you're not going to quote them on, and then go into the direct quote. So for this example, let's say like, okay, will be presented to the committee within the next few weeks, and we could say, we could even reword this. We could say the student body president is we could say he feels good about like the chances that it will pass the committee or something like that. Feels good about the prospects, because if we just say the SGA are quite optimistic, it's like, first of all, that doesn't really follow, like that's not what this quote is saying. That's what the president's saying. And we're also just word for word repeating a word that's in the quote, but what we could do is say like they feel, or like, even you could say like, if you want to include some, this is kind of out there info, but you could be like, despite previous attempts to pass this sort of bill failing, the student body president feels good about its future, and then so even like there, you're saying the same thing, but you're introducing new information, assuming it exists, right? You're saying like people tried to do this in the past, it did or it didn't work, and I'm pretty sure they have tried to do stuff like that in the past and it didn't work. But okay, let's see what else we got here. Are still to be, so this is passive voice right here. Several meetings are still to be attended. That's just some crazy shit. Like I don't know why anyone would ever write that like that. But what you could do is like, it's pretty obvious. Like SGA will have more meetings. Like we'll have several more meetings throughout March and May. That's all you need to say. And this is pretty much all just like, this should be 5 words, because we already know that the administrator, like they're waiting to decide on whether or not they'll pass it. So this whole thing pretty much is unnecessary. All you're trying to tell them is that they're going to have more meetings, which even that, yeah, like naturally they're going to have more meetings. So that could fall into like the obvious thing. So this type of graph I would just pretty much totally get rid of. Let's see. Let me write out. So this is, you can just say stress. You don't need to do stress levels. That will lead to. Okay, so I would just I get rid of all that, because if you're alleviating stress, it's kind of, that would help mental health. It's like you don't need to say both of those things. They kind of go hand in hand. We'll skip the quote. According to stats studied by Suchi in his research, fall semester has more classes in between holidays than spring semester. I mean, you'd be like a study by Suchi, like in his research, this is, nope, shit, fuck, nope. honestly, like this is just a fact. Like I don't know why anybody would need to do research on that. So you could just say that, you don't need somebody to like somebody could sit down and do the math themselves. You don't need to like need a researcher to tell you that. All about 6 this is just it's not really relevant to the article. We're talking about like a potential bill being passed. We're not really talking about like we don't need to know how many days. Um, are in class more in comparison to other Texas universities. Administering the fall break will not help too much in regards to days in class. I'm just going to ignore that because that's a confusing graph. We'll follow with this resolution. Okay. So again, we say this in the quote. Okay. And they are definitely not the first school to take steps to actively increase mental health on campus. And also you don't increase mental health. A university in Canada conducted a study with their students regarding their fall break. 90% of the students voted yes. That's good information. That's really good information. That's the type of thing I'm talking about. That external info. That's why I think this is like pretty much. There's definitely an intentionally badly written article because this is good journalism that's being done here. It's just written poorly, but yeah, like this is the type of thing I was talking about with the external info. You do your research, you find something else, and then it's like this, while poorly displayed, is like a good graph. Yeah, this is also just unnecessary. But yeah, this is I went through this pretty quick, but as you can see, like a lot of this stuff is just really not necessary. And I highly recommend anybody who writes once you get done, go back and just cross out stuff and see if you can if the article remains the same without it. I think that's the best way to do it. Just do like, highlight a sentence that you're questionable about, delete it, and reread the graph. And if it works still, then you're good. And if you're like, oh well, maybe I need it back, just Control Z, put it back. And the same goes for graphs and really anything. But yeah, like this really like if you look at like famous writers and stuff, they have so many quotes about concision, and it's in my opinion because like this is actually like this is the skill, right? When it comes to writing, is keeping it short, knowing what to omit, and it takes a really, really long time and a really good understanding of your audience to nail it. But like if you start learning it now, it's going to become a lot easier because, writing as a field is full of people with huge egos who want to waste people's time because they think they've got something to say when they really don't. And so the way you distinguish yourself as a writer is you don't be that. Do not waste people's time. Do not think of yourself as like some gift to the world. It's just not, even if you are, you'll destroy that if you just get too lost in your own ego. So don't write from your ego, don't write to fill the page, write purely to convey info. um, but with that, I think that's pretty much it. I appreciate you, Austin, for attending my rant. I will post the slides and the video online later today. But if you have any questions, let me know. And yeah, that's pretty much it.